first introduced to maple sugaring about more than 10 years ago. I'm getting old. When I worked at a nature center in Maryland. I grew up in South Bend, Indiana, moved out to Maryland after I graduated college and worked as a naturalist at a nature center there. Growing up, I never had anything other than like Aunt Jemima, log cabin, didn't even know there was a difference. But then I worked at a nature center where every February we dedicated ourselves to maple sugaring. Did field trips, had public programs on the weekends where people came in, and I learned so much. I learned that it's really fun. It's delicious. Once you've started eating real maple syrup, you tend to not want to go back to the old stuff. It's just not as good. So then years go by, and about 4 years ago, my family decided to move back to Indiana, be closer to our families, and we bought a property in Zionsville, just 2 acres, but it's 2 very wooded acres. And the first time I walked the property, I looked around and I said, these are all maple trees. And looked at my husband and said, we can make maple syrup if we buy this house. And he was like, yeah, okay, sure. Well, we ended up buying the house, and 4 years later, we've invested way more money than I want to tell you into our little maple syrup hobby turned business. So that's kind of how I got my start. That first year we tapped 5 trees. This season I plan to tap about 60. So we've grown. Here, I'm going to pass that back to you, and then if you want a notepad or anything to take notes, there are some up there. All right. So my little business is called 2 Acre Woods, because we only have 2 acres of woods. And last year was the first time I made money on it, which was really exciting for me. But yeah, so it's just a fun hobby. By show of hands, who here has ever made maple syrup or helped somebody make maple syrup? Okay, so everybody else is brand new to it. Have you guys made it on your own, like at your own property? How many trees do you tap? Oh, so you guys you're in. You're going to do 50 this year. Okay, all right. So this is 101 here. You guys might have some 201 questions. You guys might even tell me a few things, but that's okay.
We had some issues last year. So
Okay, cool. All right, so we're going to start at the very basic level of how do we make maple syrup? So I'm going to ask you all, and you guys can't answer. Where does maple syrup come from? How do you make it? Maple tree sap. Okay, so there's a common misconception among some people that when you tap a maple tree, you're going to put a tap in it and out comes the syrup. And that's not the case. Okay, we're going to tap a maple tree because we want the sap inside of it, and we're going to use that sap, we're going to boil it down, and we're going to make maple syrup. So, starting even before that, where does this come from? How did people figure this out? So, North America is really unique for making maple syrup because it was not a thing that was being done in Europe. Native Americans have done it for hundreds, if not thousands of years. There's a few different legends of who was the first that discovered it, where did it come from. And one legend that I have heard and been told was that there was a Native American man who was upset, and so he took his hatchet and went like this into a tree and walked away from it. And a little while later, somebody noticed that water was dripping out of the tree, so they stuck a bucket under it. And then used that water to cook with. And when you boil sap down, you get syrup, and then they've discovered, oh, this is, delicious. Whether or not there's truth to that legend, I do not know, but that's a legend I've been told. But people aren't the only ones who understand that maple trees are super special, and they make something delicious. Do I have any birders in the room who can tell us who this top bird is there? He's got a clue in his name. Yeah, that is a yellow-bellied sapsucker. And sapsuckers get that name because they like to drink sap out of trees. So some woodpeckers, you'll watch them come make holes in trees, and they'll make one hole here and then fly over here and make another hole, or they'll make one really big hole. Sapsuckers make these lines of holes. If you find lines of holes like that in a tree, you probably got a sapsucker hanging around. They love maple trees. They'll do it on other trees too, but maples are their favorites. And they're doing it because that sap is nice and sugary and sweet. They do drink a little bit of it, but what also happens is the sweet, sugary sap attracts bugs. And then they eat bugs, right? Squirrels have also been observed, like eating the buds off of the ends of maple trees as a preference in that springtime of year, and we'll talk a little bit more about the season in a minute. So, syrup has been made for hundreds of years. You can sort of see in this image here that what was often done in the past was to take big kettles over a fire, boil it down that way, slowly moving it from the watery sap to the syrup. You'd have to go out and carry all your buckets. Before cast iron was around, they would have syrup in big hollowed out logs, and you would heat up rocks in a fire and move hot rocks in, which you can imagine is an incredibly slow process because those rocks are going to cool really fast. So then you got to take them out and reheat them. I can't imagine how time-consuming that is, knowing how time-consuming making syrup is now. But it was a reliable source of sugar during a time of the year where there's not a lot else. And over the years, maple syrup was a great way, and still is for some people, for farmers to supplement their income in the winter months when you can't grow a whole lot. So things have changed though. This is not how maple syrup is made anymore. Now, big commercial productions look more like this. Okay, so if you're buying maple syrup, real maple syrup from the store, it's probably been tapped out of the trees and pumped through tubing systems that look like this. They use large-scale, $50,000 or more evaporators, bottled with sophisticated filtering and bottling systems. None of us in this room are likely to ever do that. But you can make maple syrup at your house. So let's talk about when and where. So does anybody know when, without looking at the answer, when do you want to tap maple trees? When can you make syrup? It's a very seasonal thing.
February?
Typically, yeah. Why? What is it about February?
Temperatures.
Yes.
Temperatures are good.
Yeah, the temperatures are just right. So that time of year, February typically in this part of the country, if you go up to New England and talk about making maple syrup in January or February, they're like, you're crazy, we make maple syrup in March. But here, that time of year, usually we have days above freezing, nights below freezing, okay? And when that happens, that triggers the tree to start getting ready for spring. And what happens to the trees in spring? I know you all know these answers. What do? Right now there's no leaves, and in the spring, yeah, they bloom or they bud, right? So at the ends of the branches on a tree, you have what we call buds. Oh, I just pulled the bud off of this one. Whoops. We have these buds. And the buds are where either the little baby leaves or flowers, depending on the tree and its timing of those things, are stored. So the tree has been dormant through the winter, and when those temperatures get just right, the tree starts to pump sap upwards. There's sap year-round, but that time of year, the sugar content gets really, really high because the tree needs all that sugar to produce those new plant parts. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so, and the alternating of freeze and thaw between above freezing during the day, below freezing at night, also increases the rate at which that happens. So you need that temperature timing. Typically that happens end of January and February. You can ask sugar makers around Indiana right now, and everybody's kind of like, should we be tapping our trees right now? Because it's a little early, but the temperatures feel right. And we can talk about that a little bit more later. I have not tapped my trees yet. I know a couple people have. I'm kind of like, ugh, so we'll see. And then the season lasts until the buds open up on the trees. Okay? Now, that can be into the first week of March. It can be the second week of February. Depends on the weather for that particular year. So I have had my trees open up midway through February because we got a weekend in February where it was 65, 70 degrees, and you look up at the buds on the trees, they all open up. When that happens, your sugar content in your sap drops, so you're not going to get nearly as much sap, and the sap you do get is not going to be sweet, okay? It starts to turn bitter. And you'll just notice that your sap will generally stop flowing nearly as much, okay? So it's a very kind of weather-dependent thing. We planned this program right now, January 11th, because with the idea of it would give people a couple weeks to get themselves together if they wanted to do it. I don't know, we'll see what the weather does. I'm not a meteorologist, I can't tell you. I have seen some things that they're predicting last couple weeks of January to be real cold. We'll see. And then the other thing that's cool about it is this is a uniquely Midwest to New England activity. There are not a lot of places you can do this just because maple trees don't grow everywhere. So the map you see here is the range of sugar maples in the United States. Okay? Now, sugar maples are not the only kind of maple you can tap. All right, let's back up a little bit. So if you want to make maple syrup, you're going to need some supplies, and we'll come back to this in a few minutes, and I've got a bunch of supplies here that I will show you. But there's a list here, and we can talk about this. You're going to, at the very least, need something to drill into the tree. You got to get into the tree, so you need a drill bit. They make special drill bits for maple sugaring that are supposed to be better for your tree and less likely to break. I can show this to y'all in a little bit if anybody wants to come up and look around at it. The size of drill bit that you're going to use depends on the size of your spiles. We'll talk about that. I have broken non-special tree bits in my trees when I've been just hanging things up. So I don't know what makes this so special, but I do know I have not broken it in 4 years of tapping trees. You're going to need something to collect your sap in. You're going to need somehow to store it. You're going to need somehow to cook it and how to know when it's done and what to do with it when you're done. So we'll go through that step by step. But before you can tap a tree, you got to know what kind of tree you're tapping. So let's talk about maple trees. And if the weather were not what it is, we were going to go outside and do some tree ID. Everybody should have gotten one of these. It's 2 pages, a little tree ID key. If you didn't, we'll make some more copies and get you one before you leave. If you only have one tree in your yard and you know it's a maple tree, then you don't need to worry about it. But if you've got a whole forest full of trees and you're trying to decide which ones are our maple trees and you didn't do it before the leaves came off, you might have a challenge ahead of you. Winter tree identification is difficult. I've been a naturalist for a long time, and I still sometimes have to go, okay, wait, let me get a guide out because I can't just do all of them like this. So there's a few clues you can look for. Trees in general, and I won't spend a ton of time on this because I don't want to bore everybody. Trees in general have 2 types of branching. Okay? We have opposite branching trees, which means I've got a branch here, I've got another branch on the other side that's symmetrical. And then we have what we call alternate branching, which means if I've got a branch here, I don't have one here, but I've got one down here. Okay? So opposite and alternate. Most trees in this part of the country anyways are alternate branching. There's just a handful that are opposite. And you can remember it with a little, I can't think of the word, little clue, mnemonic, thank you, called Mad Dog. Some people say Mad Dog, some people say Mad Buck. So the M stands for maple, the A stands for ash, the D stands for dogwood, and the B stands for buckeye. Those all have opposite branching. So maple, ash, dogwood, buckeye, or horse chestnut, which is in the buckeye family, are all going to be those. You can tap any kind of maple tree, okay? Sugar maples are the most popular, and they are named such because they have the highest sugar content. Most sugar maples are going to be 40-to-1, meaning for every 1 gallon of syrup you get, you need 40 gallons of sap, okay? If you move to your silver maples, your red maples, your sugar content is going to be like 60 to 80-to-1. So when we get into exactly how you boil it down, you'll see, well, that makes a difference. There are a lot of maple trees now that have been designed and engineered to have really high sugar contents that I know some large-scale maple sugar farmers are planting, with the future in mind. The higher your sugar, the less work you gotta do, okay? So any kind of maple tree will work. This image gives you an idea of what you're looking for. So you can look for those opposite branches. The sugar maples tend to have these kind of scaly brown buds. These are what we call the buds on the end. Red maples are such because they are red on the end. They also have red leaves usually in the fall. And then this is a silver maple. They have these big round buds, which there's one out here that we can take a look at the bird window a little later if anybody wants to. I primarily, at my house, have silver maples. So I'm dealing with a lower sugar content. I do have a handful of sugar maples that I can tap. The other kind of maple that many of you might have, especially if you live in a more suburban area or developed area, are Norway maples. Anybody have Norway maples in their property that you know of? Okay. They like to plant them as like street trees or, in a subdivision when they're being built. They look almost identical to a sugar maple. When you break the branches off, they will have this like milky sap. I have heard different people argue whether or not you can tap them. I'm not going to give you an answer because I've heard both sides of the argument. I've never tried. So you can check that as well. All right, so if you have more questions about identifying trees, we can talk about that kind of one-on-one. Sugar maples, the other key to identifying them, especially if they're out in the open, they have these big round profiles. You can see a sugar maple and it's not growing straight up like this. It's big and round and bushy. This book right here is an awesome little key for winter tree ID. It's you go through and it's like, is it this or this? Then go to this number. I love this thing. This same company also makes a bunch of different little pocket keys for wildflowers and things like that, and I absolutely love them. So if you want to look at that, you can. We've got a couple other tree guides up here. Here's another one that's a different color, must be a different edition. 50 Trees of Indiana is an oldie but a goodie. I've heard this is being updated soon, but that's a great book. So know what your trees are. If you have a lot of property and you're trying to find your maple trees on it, my suggestion is to take some tape or something to mark them in the fall. That way, you're not standing around when it's cold out going, I think this one is the maple. Because it's not always obvious if you've got a ton of trees.
Okay. And they all start looking the same once you've been staring at them.
Absolutely, 100%.
People who know trees.
Yep, yeah, 100%. Okay, so before I move on, any questions about identifying your tree? Everybody sure they have maples at their house? Or wherever you want to tap a tree? Okay, all right, so let's move on. So let's say you've identified a maple or 2 or 20 that you're gonna tap, okay? How do you tap a tree? What do you do? So, like I said, first step is you are going to need to drill a hole. So, I recommend getting a power drill, okay? They do use little hand drills. I've used those with kids to tap trees before because I don't want to hand kids a drill. But I would suggest a good power drill. These specialized maple drill bits, usually you get them in either a 5/16 size or 7/16 size. Depends on the size of your spiles that you buy. Spiles, people call them spouts, look like this, okay? So, let me back up. You're gonna find your spot on your tree, okay? Ideally, you want your tree to be healthy and old enough. Some people will wonder, am I hurting the tree if I tap it? The answer is usually no. The analogy that's often given that I think really does hold up is like donating blood, okay? As healthy adults, we can donate a little bit of blood and we're fine because our bodies will make more and it will not harm us. I'm not gonna ask a 6-year-old to donate blood because they're still growing and it could bother them, could hurt them. I'm not gonna ask a sick person to donate blood because it could hurt them. The same goes for trees, okay? So the standard I was always taught is your tree should be 12 inches in diameter. So the size of a ruler. I've heard 10, I've heard other sugar makers even say as low as 8. I would not tap anything with a diameter less than 10 for sure. 12 if you want to be safe, okay? And then for every additional 12 inches of diameter, you can add another tap on your tree. So let's say you've got a big maple that this is this wide around, you could potentially put 3 taps in that tree. You're not going to put them right next to each other. You're going to spread them out to different parts of the tree at least 12 inches apart. Does that make sense? Okay.
So is the maximum 3 taps per tree?
I've never heard of max per tree. It's just like for the size of the tree, as like, you know, the bigger the tree you get, the more you can put it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just read somewhere that the maximum 3, so I wasn't.
I've not heard a certain number max. That's a good question. So then your best spot you want to look for. One, you want to find a spot that's easily accessible to you. Okay, if you've got brambles growing on this side of the tree, you probably don't want to put it on the side of the tree where you're going to have to like get into the thorn bushes to collect your sap. Ideally, somewhere that's going to get good sun. That sun's going to warm up your tree. It's going to make the sap flow, making it a little easier for you to get more sap. And then under a big branch, because think of it, the tree is sending the sap up to the branches. So if you're under a branch, you're in that direct route. Okay? Do all those things always line up and you get to tap it exactly like that? No, not at all. But those are what you should aim for. You should not tap under a broken branch, though. Okay, like let's say your tree lost a limb a couple of years ago, and the tree itself is doing fine, but you know there's a big broken spot right there. Well, don't put it right under that one because it's probably not going to have as much production right there. How do you know if a tree's healthy? Okay, does it have a ton of broken branches? Is it losing bark anywhere? Those are signs that maybe your tree's not doing so well. Okay. When you tap a tree, it's generally not going to hurt it, but just like having a cut on your arm, it opens you up to potential bacteria, infections. Fungus is a big thing for trees. So if your tree is already unhealthy, don't tap that tree. Okay? I have one tree that I've tapped the last couple of years. We've noticed, though, some rot up towards the top. We've got pileated woodpeckers that are just like working on it every day, and I've got big holes in it, and just looking at it right now, there's a lot less buds on it than there are on the surrounding trees. I can just see it. So I'm not going to tap that one this year, okay? See how it does next year. Maybe next year we'll change our minds. Maybe next year we're going to have to take that one down. You know, we'll see. So you find your spot, and you want to go about usually waist high or so, okay? We'll talk about our tubing systems in a minute because that can change that just a little bit, but usually about waist high, and for different of us that might be different heights. But you want to be able to get your sap off of the tree easily. And then when you drill your hole, you want to drill about 2 inches in or so, 1 to 2 inches. I would not do anything less than 1 inch, not anything more than 2 inches, okay? And so I always drill at a slight angle. Okay, because that just helps the flow. You want it to drip out. And then after I've drilled my hole, you're gonna have a lot of little wood bits on your drill and on your drill bit. Take something clean, whether it's a nail that you have washed off, put a little hand sanitizer or something on, or a stick, and just get the wood shavings out of that hole, because it's just gonna block up your hole, okay? And then you're gonna take a spile, and you're going to hammer it in. Okay, so you can see in this picture here, there's just, it kind of sticks into the end, and then you take a hammer. Really, you're supposed to use a mallet so that you don't damage your spiles. I don't have a mallet, so I just use the hammer gently. And just kind of tap, 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 tap. You should not have to like bang in it really hard. It should go in pretty easily. And then, feel it. Does it feel secure? If it does, you're good to go, okay? Every once in a while, for whatever reason, you might end up with a hole that's like a little too big for whatever reason, and our tap just keeps falling out because of its placement. That's fine. Drill a new hole on the other side of the tree, you know, if you can, unless you're drilling a teeny tiny tree that's this big, and then you're fine. And then you need a way to collect your sap. On a good day, you're tapping when it's nice, let's say it's 40, 45 degrees, the sun's out, you're going to see sap start to drip out of here immediately. It's a very satisfying feeling when you see that right away. Sap looks like water. It tastes like water because it is mostly water, okay? It's like 94% water, 6% sugar, okay? So even if you taste it, slightly sweet taste, but most of us eat so much sugar all the time that our sensitivity to very slight sweetness like that is a little marred. So there's different kinds of spiles that you can buy, and the kind you get will depend on your collection method. In previous times, before metal was readily available, people would take like sumac branches, hollow them out, use them as a spile. I'm not saying you can't do something like that, but these tend to cost like, I don't remember, I think these are about $1. This was 50 cents, you know, so they're not really expensive. I would encourage you to buy some spiles and buy a couple extra, because I almost guarantee you are going to lose them. You're going to lose one or two somewhere along the line, and it's just good to have a backup. So, the size of the drill bit you get depends upon the size of the spile you get. You can tell just by looking, this one is bigger than this one, okay? This is the kind of spile that is traditionally used for these pretty metal buckets. You can use the smaller size too. But the way this works is this is in the tree. There's a hook on here that hooks into, thank you. Hooks into the back of this, and it just hangs here and drips into the bucket. These are beautiful. They are picturesque. It's very lovely to have these on your trees, but they are the most expensive way to collect sap. Some of the resources of where you can buy the stuff will sell these used, and you can get them for a little less, but they're expensive. I have like 6 or 7 of these, and I put them up on the trees like right along my driveway because I think they're really pretty, and use all the other stuff in the back.
They also dent really
Yep.
easily, and then if you stack them together, they get all that grit, moisture,
Yep.
and then they're really hard to get apart.
Yep. So if you don't want to spend any money on your collection method besides your spile, stick an old milk jug on there that you've cleaned out really well, put a hole in it, and just kind of stick it over your spile. It might not stay up if it gets super duper full because it's not meant for that, but I've seen that done many times to collect sap. Especially if you're just starting out and you're like, I don't know if I really want to invest any money in this, if this is something I want to do for the long term. These buying them used I think are about $5 a piece, okay? And then you need a lid, okay? And the main reason you want to have a lid is to keep more water from getting in, okay? Yes, you're keeping bugs and leaves and sticks and things out, but you're generally going to strain it before you cook it anyways. Your main thing you don't want in here is rainwater, because you're just adding more work for yourself later down the line, okay? So put a lid on it. They make some that are like a flat lid that come up like this. I think that's the kind you guys have here, isn't it, the flat lids?
We borrow those.
Yeah.
They flap up in the wind.
Yep, they flap up in the wind. Sometimes they fall off. These fall off too.
They fall off.
But I have a bunch of these that are like half, they just bend on and they kind of
Just
go on.
snap on one.
And they're not foolproof. You're still gonna get some water in here on occasion. So, but they're very pretty. Make your yard look nice. Less pretty option are the bags, okay? So you get these bags. There's a holder here, and I use this kind of spile for these. I've got a ton of these at my house, like 30-ish or so. You stick the spile into the tree like this, and then this little hook here just hangs on it, and it hangs like this, okay? These bags will hold a lot more than that. I think these are 3-gallon bags. And I have not yet, I need to knock on some wood, had one of them get so heavy that it just falls off of here, if it was on here properly. You do sometimes have to like re-put them on. These bags are like, like 10 cents a piece or something. So they're really cheap.
Are those reusable?
I have heard people say yes. I do not reuse them at the end of the season. I will use one on one tree for the whole season unless something happens to it, and then buy new ones next season because it's so cheap. They're so cheap. And one of the things that is important about maple sugaring is making sure your supplies are kept clean, and that includes, storing them for the other 10 months out of the year. And it's hard to get the inside of a plastic bag completely clean and then store it dry. So I buy new stuff. Yeah, I buy the new bags every year. So these, if you buy these, they come with this little metal rim. The bag just wraps around it. They slide in. They're fantastic. If you're just starting out, I would probably recommend these. They're really easy. Okay.
I like those because you can see when you're getting sacked.
Yeah.
And without having to go check.
Exactly. And then they've got a nice little handle, so if your tree's way out here and you need to carry it, you just carry it by the handle the whole way and then just dump it in to wherever you're storing your sap. All right, last thing I want to show you are the tubing systems. I put up my picture of my bags there. They hold more than the buckets, so you don't necessarily have to collect every single day unless you've had a really productive day. Some days you do have to collect every single day. So, a lot of people use tubes. Okay? These have grown in popularity a ton, and large-scale sugar makers will have huge tubing systems. Do you guys do tubes? You said you have 20. Okay. What kind of collection do you use? Bags, buckets?
We use a 1-gallon water jug with a bungee cord around the tree to hold.
Okay, there you go. Inventive, yeah. So that works. So the tubing systems, I'll go back a page here. 2 pages. Maybe 3. 4. You can see they have a ton of interconnected tubes here. These come into these, and then they've got bigger tubes, and this would all flow to a central location. If you're fortunate enough that your property is all going downhill towards wherever it is that you're collecting your sap, that can work well to just use gravity on your side. People buy vacuum pumps though, and then you've got to manage your pressure gauges and all of it, and sometimes you get leaks, and you got to figure out where the leaks are. I've never worked on anything of this scale, but it makes collecting easier, but it's a lot more work to get it going, okay? This next one. The way that I'm going to use these, and this is my first year using tubing, is that, so this spile goes into the tree. It's made out of plastic, and this was 25 cents more than the traditional one, and it is called an antibacterial spile that came out of Cornell a few years ago, and people are excited about it, but still only 50 cents for this. That's supposed to eliminate your bacteria buildup, which will reduce your sap flow. So this will get onto this, and then this, I'm going to cut tubing at about 2 feet and go straight into a 5-gallon bucket that I've cut a hole in the top of. Now, the benefit of having a couple feet of tubing going down out of your tree is that it creates a bit of a vacuum, okay? So if you've ever used something to siphon water out of something, you've experienced what this phenomenon looks like, where once it starts going, it keeps sucking and sucks out more. The research shows that if you've got 24 inches of tubing, that's enough to create that vacuum, and you'll see about 15 to 20% increased sap flow over the year. So that's another reason that some people will do that. It's a little bit more stuff. These are good for usually 2 to 3 seasons. Some people replace them every year. And I got 100 feet of tubing, and I think I spent $50 or $60 on it. So cost-benefit analysis on whether or not that's the right option for you and what you're trying to do. It's up to you. So, all right. Questions about our collection methods? Yes?
Question. On the tubing, would that have to be food grade?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, and if you're buying from any of the maple syrup companies that supply stuff, it will be food grade. I don't know if you go to Lowe's, if you can buy food grade stuff. I will tell you, if you're going to Lowe's and buying buckets, even to store your sap in, so you're collecting sap, okay? You might be collecting it every single day, and maybe you can't get to the point where you're boiling it down until the weekend. You've got to find a place to keep it. I have like 35-gallon buckets at my house that I put them in. Make sure your buckets are food-grade buckets, okay? I can't tell you what will happen if you get the non-food grade buckets that cost half the amount, but certainly if you're ever going to try to sell it or anything, I would get food grade. There's probably plastics that, the food grade ones are BPA free. I think you can just feel better about it for yourself. And certainly if you ever plan to sell it to anybody, you should have food grade buckets. The buckets are actually the most expensive thing, like per thing that I'm buying right now, because the buckets are $5 a piece and then an extra $1 or $2 for a lid. So, but definitely get food grade stuff. Have a spot to store your sap in the meantime. You need to keep your sap kind of cold. If it gets too warm, you will start to see this film build on the top of it. That's bacteria. That's going to affect the taste of your syrup. It's not necessarily going to make your syrup unsafe. It gets cloudy, then your sap has spoiled. Some people will say, as soon as you see this cloudiness, toss it out. I will be honest with you, I have cooked sap that has a little cloudiness in it. Sometimes life gets in the way and you cannot boil your sap just because it's a warm day. So try to keep it as cold as you can. If you've got hasn't been a very snowy winter, but if it had been and you've got snow plowed up somewhere on the side of your driveway or something, somewhere to stick it like that, stick it in a garage where maybe it's going to be cold but out of the sun, good options. Yeah. Any other questions about collection? Yeah.
I was just wondering how much
sap can you expect?
Yeah.
Great question.
Like a single tree.
Great question. 15 to 20 gallons of sap out of a tree.
Over the
in a
season.
season.
Okay.
In a season. 15 to 20 gallons of sap per tree per season is what is generally expected. Some can be as low as 10, some can be as high as 20. 15 is a decent middle number.
Is that for one pack?
Yes, per tap. Yeah. Yep. So, if I know that I need 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup, depends on how much syrup you want, and how fast your family goes through syrup. My kids use syrup like it's going out of style, so we keep a lot for ourselves. I was very sparing with the real stuff when I started making my own. Yes?
Is there any benefit to blending sugar maple, silver maple syrup?
The only benefit is then you're you won't tell a difference taste-wise.
Well, it doesn't make more work for you?
No. I mean, the silver maples are going to have more water in them to begin with, right? Some of the larger scale producers, and I am doing this for the first time this year and I'm excited about it, use reverse osmosis systems. If anybody have reverse osmosis systems just for their drinking water at their homes? See a couple of heads nodding. Yeah. So reverse osmosis what's the premise of it? Why would it be good for your drinking water? Do you know?
Pulls the impurities out.
It pulls the impurities out, makes your water taste better. So I don't know exactly when it started, but it has become very common in making maple syrup to use reverse osmosis. And it pulls out the impurities, but in this case, the impurities are what you want. The reverse osmosis system removes the water and leaves you a lower water content liquid, a higher sugary sap, so that when you get to the point of boiling, you're already starting from a higher level. Does that make sense? It's an investment. What's that?
Did you make your own?
I purchased something. I did not purchase the $2,000 systems. I found one for $400 that I can tell you about if you want some more info, but I can't vouch for it just yet because I haven't used it yet. But the bigger systems are $2,000, and your average backyard maker cannot stomach that cost. I have seen people go to Lowe's and get all the reverse osmosis parts and make their own. I'm not a handy person.
That's what we're going to try next year.
You guys are? Okay, cool. I'd be interested to hear how that goes. Okay. Any other questions before we move on to boiling?
Real quick, for the tapping of the trees, is
Yeah.
there a pattern that you do?
Great question. Great question. From year to year. Great question, and I'm sorry I did not hit that. You can generally see the scar from where you were the year before. As soon as you take that tap out, the tree's going to start to heal itself. Just the same way your skin will scab and eventually scar if you have a cut or a puncture or something. So usually you can find the tap scar from last year. If not, just try to remember. And You want to go at least a few inches over from where you were last year. It doesn't need to be the full 12, but a little bit over, right? There's scar tissue there, just like you wouldn't want to cut into a spot where you'd already had a cut because you're going to build up scar tissue and it's going to hurt. And you may not, it's just not the greatest for the tree because it's probably still healing a little bit. So you go over a little bit, and I have always been taught to do a zigzag pattern over the years as you go around your tree. So you can go over and go up a little bit, or go over and go down a little bit. Because like, let's say I really like this side of my tree because I know it gets great afternoon sun, it's got a big limb here, I want to stay on this side, so I'm just going to pop over a little bit and go down a little bit. Or pop over and go up a little bit. Does that make sense? And by the time you got back around, your scars are probably going to be so far gone that you won't even see them. Good question.
So you don't have to plug the hole?
You do not have to plug the hole. Nope. You take those, you take your spiles out when you see those buds open, and you might still see some sap drip out, you know, over the next coming weeks, but it's fine. Your tree will be okay. All right. So, good question. Any other questions?
So do you have like storage for your sap, or?
Just 5-gallon buckets.
So, but I mean, refrigerated storage,
No.
anything like that?
I do.
So we work during the week, so.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I have not, I am hard pressed to toss out sap. I know some people will at the first sight of climbing this, but I don't necessarily do that all the time. I will move it into my garage if I think it's going to be a little warmer, because my garage is generally cooler because of the side of the house it's on. Keep it on my porch a lot of times, and if I have snow, I'll stick it in the snow bags, stick those buckets in the snow bags. You can buy those big 40-gallon, not 40-gallon, whatever size gallon they are, the giant holding tanks, or even the big barrels. Again, just make sure it's food grade. And make sure you keep it clean and dry throughout the rest of the year.
Is there a longest period you went? So we let it sit for maybe 5 days before we.
I've let it sit that long. Yeah. I mean, like last year when I was making maple syrup, I was working an incredibly demanding job where I was working way more than 40 hours a week and coming home and trying to boil some every night. But you know, life happens. Sometimes you just can't get to it, and that's fine. It's fine. Okay, so try to keep your sap full until it's ready to boil, and then you're gonna boil it. Okay? Do you guys have an evaporator? Homemade one or?
Homemade.
Homemade. Okay. Does it look anything like a couple of these pictures?
Ours looks like the first one up there on the upper left.
Okay, great. Okay, so this tends to be where people run into their roadblocks. I've got all this sap. What in the world am I going to do with it? How am I going to cook it? You can go buy a commercial evaporator for if you've got, you know, a few $1,000s to drop, and it will be amazing, and you will love it. But most of us can't spend that kind of money on our hobbies. So I have seen a lot of really inventive ways of doing it. You can get your cast iron pots and do it over an open fire. If you cook over an open fire and don't have a chimney, your syrup is going to be smoky. Okay? You will have smoky flavored syrup. That does not bother some people. Some people, if you're just doing this for a little bit, it's just for fun or just to do a little bit with your family, that's totally fine. Go for it. But if you don't want your syrup to have that smoky flavor, you need to create a chimney style method. So I've seen a couple really interesting inventive ways of doing it. You don't want to boil in your house, okay? You don't want to do it on your stove. You have so much steam coming off that you are going to peel the paint off of your walls, okay? And your whole kitchen will be sticky. I can just, I guarantee you can have your vent fan on high, you can have all your windows open, everything's going to be sticky just because the amount of water that has to come out of it, right? So we say we started at 3% or 6% sugar, you need to get to 33% sugar, okay, to have syrup. So you got to boil off a lot of water. A lot of water has to go away. So do the most of it outside. You're going to finish inside probably over your stove. That's the easiest. I've seen people do stuff on a propane grill with a pan that is safe to put on that. You're going to go through a lot of propane that way. But that's, there's cost benefit to all of it. If you got propane but you don't have a lot of firewood, that works. Most people create something that looks like these systems here. So these people took a grill grate and they took cement blocks and they just have a fire under it. That probably works. What I don't see, and I just pulled that picture off of Google, I don't know for sure what their setup is, but what I don't see there is a chimney out the back. So they're probably going to end up with some smokiness to their syrup. Less so than these people, just because this is so high up. If you choose to go with a method like this, or any of them, what you want to do is when you're going to start with something that looks like water and you're ending up with something that looks like syrup. You want to kind of, especially if you're adding more, as things start to get cooked down more, move it into a separate pot, okay? Does that make sense? You don't want to have something that's halfway done and then pour a bunch of brand new sap on top of it. Does that make sense? Okay. So, because probably you have more sap to start with than what this pot can hold. So you've got buckets of sap over here waiting to be added as well. Okay. This looks kind of a step up from this, right? These are big pans. I've seen people use think of catering pans, not like the flimsy aluminum ones, but the heavier ones that you would have big wide catering dishes in, or at a buffet or something like that, those kind of pans, and put them over. You just got cinder blocks, they've got their fire under there, and they've created a little chimney up the back to pull the smoke up and out. So that works well. Or I bought what is in the top left, which was the most economical evaporator I could find at the time. It's from a company called Vermont Evaporator Company. It is an old steel drum that has been transformed into a stove. If you are a handy person, you might be able to do that yourself. I am not in that category of handiness to be able to do it yourself. And then what kind of sets this apart from this style is the pan here. I thought about bringing it today, but it's a mess and heavy, so I did not. But it is 3 feet long, so 3 feet long, 2 feet wide pan with 3 sections in it. And the sections have little holes, at the bottom of these sections. So as the sap cooks down, it naturally flows towards the front, okay, because of the way we've got it set up, that it's set up to go that way naturally. And then there is a spigot right here to draw it off when it's done or almost done. Okay? So that's what I've been using. I put the link or their website on the little resource sheet I handed out because I think it's great. I bought mine in their first year of production and it was $700. And that's the economical way to do it. I think they've upped their prices a little bit, but they've also gotten nicer. It also comes with grill grates and a thing so you can use it in the off season as a wood-fired grill or a smoker. So, if you're thinking of buying a smoker because you like to have smoked meats, good option to be a multi-functioning tool. All right, so there's the other thing you can do is look for a used one. I believe I put Maple Trader on here. Is a forum. I did not. Maple Trader is a website that has some forums where people literally, you can buy used supplies from people, things like that. The problem is we don't live in an area where there's a ton of that stuff. If you lived in Vermont, you'd have all sorts of people you could go buy used stuff from, but there's just not a lot around here. All right, any questions about cooking? I'm gonna get into finishing and how you know when it's done in a second, but just this first part of boiling your stuff down. Questions? Okay. All right, so how do you know when it's done? That's a big question that a lot of people have. How do I know when I have syrup? Okay? If you have ever cooked with sugary things before, whether it's, caramel or even chocolate, when you're melting chocolate, you can go real quick from I've got something melting and all of a sudden I have scorched it. Okay? So same for maple syrup. You gotta kind of be on top of it, and it's one of those things where it's you spend so long just waiting, is this ever gonna be done? And then all of a sudden it's okay, now it's done, we gotta do all this stuff at once. I always get really frantic at the very end when I'm finishing it. So I highly recommend finishing your syrup indoors in a pot, okay? What I do is, there's a couple of clues that you know you're getting close. You get this foaminess on the top of your syrup when you get close to being done. It's not just some bubbles. You'll always have some bubbles as it's boiling, but it's this thick layer of foam, okay? It's gonna be darker in color, but if you're like me, sometimes you're finishing your syrup at 11 p.m. and you can't tell very well what color it is. If you stick a wooden spoon in it and pull it up, you should see a little bit of, it gets that thicker consistency. It's not going to just drip off like water. You can mix it a little bit. The darker color will come, before you're there. It's the consistency you're looking for more than anything. I have taken stuff off of my evaporator and then spent another 3 hours boiling inside because I took it off too soon. I have also scorched the bottom of my evaporator pan because I'm trying to eliminate that a little bit. So it's just one of those things, just like any kind of cooking, that the more you do it, the better you get at it, the better you know the signs. So take it inside, finish it in a pan. Big stock pots are great for finishing. You want as much surface area under your stuff as you can get. So sometimes I will have a couple big pots on my stove and be finishing in a couple places at once, just because if I've got a stock pot that is this tall and I fill it up to the top, well, the stuff on the top is not getting heated, so I'm stirring it the whole time, and it's just not as efficient as if I get two smaller pots, put both of them out. Does that make sense? Okay. But then you're checking two different pots, and that's not fun either. So there's a couple different tools you can get to know when your syrup's done. You can just eyeball it, and if you're just making it for yourself, doesn't matter. A thermometer. Good candy thermometer is great for this. Syrup boils at 219 degrees. Okay, so that's the number you're looking for. What does water boil at? 212. Good job. Does water always boil? Like, is 212 the same everywhere, every day? No. So test your thermometer with just pure boiling water, and then whatever your thermometer tells you, add 7. Okay, so maybe your water boils at 211 today because of the changes in pressure, or maybe your thermometer is just off. Test your thermometer with water first. Most of us have a thermometer. If not, you can buy a cheap thermometer for $5-10. I prefer a hydrometer, okay, which measures the water content in something. So this is, and these break easily, so be careful with them. This is my second one. I broke the last one at the end of last season. The way you do this, and I think most sugar makers tend to prefer these over thermometers because they're a little bit more exact. You would fill your syrup in here, and then you're going to drop this in here. And if you can get this in metal with a little handle on the side, you're a lot less likely to burn your hands. But I bought a cheap one because I'm cheap. And I have to hold a cooking mitt on it when I use it. But the way this works is, let's say this is filled with syrup up to here. This will float at a different point, okay? And there's two different kinds of measurements you can see on here. One is called bricks, one is called balm. Just has to do with like the different kinds of measurements and different numbers you'll see for each. But on here it shows you the number that you want it at. This one is in bricks. Bombs will be lower numbers. But the bricks you want, depending on if you're testing it hot or cold, hot would be right here, okay, at about 60, what is that? No, 58, 59, and then cold is down here. So it depends on if you're doing it straight off the stove or cold. I always test mine hot. And if it floats, like let's say the line is right here, if my syrup's all the way up to the top, it should float right at that line. And that's when you know your syrup is done. Your syrup, when it's hot, will be thinner than the consistency of syrup when it's cold. Okay, so that can throw people off sometimes. Think of it when you warm up any kind of liquid, it tends to get thinner, right? Like even if you're just making macaroni and cheese, when your macaroni and cheese is in the pot and you're stirring it, it looks a little more watery. Once it cools down, it kind of thickens up a little bit. Same for syrup. Okay, so it might look too thin, but you're there when you get it to that temperature. Okay, and then what you do next is filter. So use just like a thin or like a fine kitchen strainer and strain out anything that's in there. I know some people who will tell you that if you've got some dead bugs in there, it just adds a little bit of flavor, but I prefer not to boil mine with dead bugs. I'm not saying one hasn't probably flown in the process, but strain out the stuff there that you don't want in it. And then you're gonna filter it, okay? If you choose not to filter your syrup before you bottle it, you're gonna get something called maple sand, okay? It's not gonna hurt you, but it's gonna be gritty, okay? I don't want gritty stuff with my pancakes. I don't know about anybody else. And the level of filter that you have will determine how much of that maple sand you end up with. The maple syrup that you buy from, whether it's a grocery store or your local farmer's market, well, maybe not your farmer's market, but anywhere that's got a bigger operation, they're probably using an actual filter press, which is like a larger scale thing that it not only filters it, but pushes out the syrup, so you have very little impurity in it. Again, those are things that cost a couple $1,000s. I'm not doing that. I have seen people filter with cheesecloth. You can. It's not going to be the greatest. It's not. You're still going to get a lot of sand in it. So what I recommend is buying a filter, or if you can sew, buy some wool sheets like this, and make your own. I did not make these because I don't sew. This is a little one I bought the first year. I think I spent like $10 on this. Okay, this is what I use now. And this is maybe a $20 purchase. This is called a pre-filter. These are a life-changing thing, okay? I use about 3 of these at a time. You buy a pack of 12 usually, and they last for several finishings, and you layer them into your filter. And then the hard part is figuring out, well, how in the world am I gonna hold this heavy thing while I pour boiling hot liquid into it? So this is the very high-tech method I've been using in my home of taking a piece of wood, putting it across the countertop, and it goes down into a pot below it. Usually also just destroying my floor with syrup at the same time. So you have like 3 layers of your pre-filters. When you first pour it in, the syrup's gonna flow through really fast, okay? And then it's gonna slow down, but this thing's still gonna have a lot of stuff in it, and you're gonna be like, what is going on? So then you take out a layer of pre-filter. The bottom of it's gonna be full of this brown, nasty gunk. I toss that in the sink to deal with later. And then your flow will increase. And so I remove a layer of pre-filter every time the flow stops. Took me a long time to get this method, but it is really working for me right now. I didn't use pre-filters the first couple of years. It changed my life when I started using them. And then once you get it all down, you still might have a little bit, because again, this is hot. You burn your hands trying to squeeze it out. I have done it many times. I like to use kitchen tongs. I get these big, like the grill, not even kitchen ones, like the ones you use on a grill. That's what I use to like squeeze out the bottom of it. A filter press would use the same method, but actually have like a mechanical feature that squeezes every little bit of it out through there. Okay. So, and then you've got it into something that then it's clean, it's ready to eat. I love taking that hot, freshly made syrup and putting it on vanilla ice cream right away. That's a fun treat. And then you gotta do something with it. So, we'll talk about bottling it in a second. Any questions about this process?
So the hydrometer method, how many shots on goal does it take you to get that correct?
Now, I like to really watch it, but I will pour stuff in there a few times and see where I'm at, and I can kind of tell. When I first started doing it,
Is there corrections you can do
if you, like, let's say you have gone too far. You've gone past the point of syrup, add water. Stir it in really well. If you get too far, if you evaporate all of your water, what are you left with? Sugar. You guys ever make maple sugar? You guys do it? No. I've never made maple sugar either. It looks really hard. Anybody ever had maple sugar candy? It's delicious. So you get down to the point of just sugar, and it's not going to be like, it's going to feel sort of liquidy still by the time you get down to it, and then you pack it. They usually pack it into like candy bowls and let it cool, and then you have these amazing, delicious treats. Some people make maple creams. There's lots of different products. I personally have never made anything other than syrup. I've tried to make sugar once or a couple times over a fire just for like demonstrations, and I usually scorch a pan when I do it because it's really hard to know. So, any other questions?
Coffee filters can work-ish for filtering that, but you're still going to get a lot of sugar stains.
Yeah, if you don't have pre-filters, use coffee filters. Get like the big ones that you would use for like a big, office coffee thing. But I would recommend just buying a pre-filter. I've given you guys some resources on there of places to buy stuff, and I'll talk to you about that more, if anybody wants to. But I bought some of it on Amazon. Like, I bought a filter and pre-filters on Amazon. So, you can buy anything on Amazon now. And then I'll give you an example. So this is syrup from last year. Do you guys see this cloudiness at the bottom? That is a little bit of maple sand. Okay? And sometimes you'll even see it sitting at the top if you haven't moved your syrup a little bit. It's not going to hurt. This is not gritty at all. It's just a little bit of those impurities that got through the filter. Okay? Does Arthur have a filter press?
Yeah, it's awesome.
They do?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is Mccloud Syrup. This was made by, what is the name of their, Arthur Sugarbush? Harris Sugarbush. Like, Arthur's his first name. Harris Sugarbush, which is in Greencastle. You can even see a little bit of it in the bottom of this. Okay? So it does escape it a little bit, but it's in there. All right. So you're done. Now you want to bottle it. Bottle your syrup while it's still hot. Anybody here can things, like canned jellies or vegetables, fruits, that sort of stuff? Okay. You don't have to go through the whole cold bath process with syrup that you do with those things. You can bottle it hot, seal it. Most of my syrup is bottled in jars like this. You could buy a case of 12 of them for less than $10. You screw the lid on, hold it upside down or lay it on its side, and that will completely seal it. If you're using mason jars, they work. They just tend to be bigger mouthed, so as you're pouring, when you're using it, you might have a little bit more spillage. I bought some mason jars at the end of last season because I was out of jars. I was so close to being done. But just, again, turn it upside down, and then as long as that thing goes down, you're good. You do not have to cold bath this. In fact, I've heard that can actually ruin your syrup if you cold bath it. Okay? If you know you're going to use it right away, and it's just for your family, you don't necessarily have to can it. You can put it into containers or whatever you have on hand. Questions? Okay.
So when you open those, you have to refrigerate it or freeze it. It will go bad.
Yep.
The bacteria knows that's real food.
Yep.
The
And it will
corn
grow
syrup
fast.
Is not real food. It does not need to be refrigerated.
Yeah. Yes. And that's a good point. Refrigerate it after it's opened. But before that, it's fine. You don't have to refrigerate it. You can store it at room temperature because it's been properly sealed. Use sterile bottles or jars or whatever you're using if you know that you're not going to eat it right away. Okay? So I had a problem a couple years ago where I made a batch that then I saw some mold growing in, but I just, it was like my first year making it, second year making it, and I just took the bottles out of the box and did it right away. I now boil all of my bottles and my lids in hot boiling water right before I bottle everything. Okay, so I will do that on the side at the same time while I'm finishing because I want to be absolutely sure that my stuff is good to go. Okay, so, and then the last thing I'll talk about, though, if you're just making it in your backyard, you probably don't care too much, is syrup grading. And the grading system has changed a little bit, the names that they use for it. But you can tell here the difference in the color between these bottles. This is a grading kit that I have. The lighter the color of syrup, the higher the grade, okay? This is, they call it like grade A fancy now, right?
Something like that.
It used to be called Vermont Fancy. They've changed some of the names. This is going to be your most expensive sought-after syrup. At the beginning of the season, the trees that you tap, the first sap that you get has the lowest bacteria content in it. Okay, bacteria does not always equal bad, but it's going to get you something like this. This is going to be lighter tasting, very sweet, less of that maple flavor. And like, you know, if you go up to New England and some of the big stores up there where they're selling it, you'll see this and it'll be more expensive. As the season goes on, your syrup will get darker. The grade decreases, okay? That doesn't mean it tastes bad. I actually prefer this. It has more of that like characteristically maple flavor to it, where this is just sweet, but not as maple. So that's just a personal preference. I've got a picture here where you can see these are the same maple grading kits. This is an earlier batch in the year, which kind of falls in the middle, and this is the last batch of the year. Okay? So even between the Mccloud Syrup and this was my last batch of the year, last year, you can see it's darker. I've seen syrup at the end of the season that looks like molasses almost because it's so dark. Okay? There's nothing wrong with it. It's just the flavor changes. Okay. All right. So you can get a grading kit if you want to. You certainly don't have to. It's not necessary. You can probably Google it, and then you enjoy your syrup. So, and if you want to monetize it at some point, you can start selling it all over the place. And I will tell you that Indiana has cottage food industry laws for people who make things at home, and there's all sorts of rules on that on the internet. But mainly, you just have to have a little thing on your bottle that says, in a certain size font, in this exact sentence, that it was produced, home produced and processed in the production area, has not been inspected by the State Department of Health. And I cannot go sell this at like Kroger, but I can sell it at a farmer's market or a farm stand or from a roadside stand. I cannot ship it out of state, but I am protected by those laws. So, questions? I don't know, do the Harrises sell like in stores?
I don't know.
I don't know
why
either.
they sell.
Yeah, I don't know either.
They have their own little store, but that's
Yeah,
covered
right.
under
Probably covered by that.
one of those rules, yeah.
So, if you guys want to look at any of the equipment, you can. I brought with me as well a couple catalogs for big companies. The Maple Resources Guide gives you a couple good things to check out. So, the Indiana Maple Syrup Association is the first thing on there. That is our statewide organization. If you start making syrup and you want to join, it's like a $20 a year fee. Actually, I think it's only $15. They send out newsletters. They operate the Sugar Shack at the State Fair, if you've ever stopped by there and bought maple syrup. Incredible wealth of information from people who have been doing it for years and years. They do an annual meeting / conference once a year. It rotates between northern Indiana and central Indiana. They do it at the beginning of December every year. It's always the first weekend in December. That way you can do stuff, you know, before you're getting ready to get started, but you're probably already thinking about getting started. But vendors will come in and they've got like a whole shopping area set up. So that's a really cool thing to check out. It was up north near Fort Wayne this year, so I think next year, I don't know if it's in Greencastle for sure, but it will be somewhere in central Indiana. So close-ish to all of us. So consider joining IMSA. It's a great organization, especially for only $15 a year. We have, the one thing they don't do is Facebook, and I was frustrated with that, so I started the Indiana Maple Syrup Producers Facebook group. If you are on Facebook and you just want a forum to like ask questions, hear what other people are doing, request to join that, and I will approve you as long as you answer the question of where you live in Indiana, just so that we don't have fake profiles joining it. But it's been a great way to just kind of network and see what other people are doing. I learned so much from seeing how other people do their stuff. Harris Sugar Bush is who we've mentioned a couple of times. They process all the syrup for Mccloud. They're out of Greencastle, so they're not far from here. They have a handful of used stuff that they sell. Mostly they're making stuff out of their own, but they are somebody you can talk to. And then a couple other suppliers I have mentioned are both in northern Indiana, if you want to buy from somebody local. Other places to order equipment, Bascom is who I typically buy from, and I've got their catalog here. They're in Vermont. They've got basically everything you could need, and they will get it to you within a week usually. So that's a good resource. Tap My Trees is really an awesome little website for the backyard sugar maker. They sell little kits that come with like 5 taps and a hydrometer and things like that. So you can, if you're just starting out and you just want to invest just a tiny bit, that's a good website to check out. And they've got a lot of tips and tricks and things like that on there. Leader Evaporator is who makes the larger, most commercial evaporators, and then Vermont Evaporator Company is the one I mentioned that I bought my evaporator from. They are a small family-owned business out of Vermont, and they are really cool people, really awesome to work with, and I have been super satisfied with their products, and I'm not being paid to say that. I wish they would pay me to say some things, because I'd be happy to. So I've got a couple catalogs up here if anybody wants to look at these. These are more for like your bigger producers. My equipment's up here. Any last questions then?
Where'd you get that filter?
The filter, I bought one of them. I have got a couple like this. I bought one of them at the annual meeting a couple years ago from some very lovely woman who makes them herself. But then I ordered another one from Bascom. Yep.
Pre-filters from them?
You can get pre-filters from them as well. The pre-filters, I just bought more of them. They come in a pack of 12. And you can use, the pre-filters probably 3-4 times, and then it's hard to really get them clean. I should have said this. Do not wash this with soap. Don't put any soap into it because it's really hard to get that out 100%, and you don't want that getting into your syrup. So just rinse and rinse and rinse and rinse and rinse. Let it air dry. They even say not to like wring it. I don't know why, so I don't though. Just rinse it as much as you can between each one. Any other questions?
What would you say is a good starting point for somebody? 1 tree, 2 taps? Would that be overwhelming in a season?
No. You got a couple taps? No, I think that's doable. But your end product, the amount that you're going to get, is not a ton. So it's what are your goals, My first year, we tapped 5 or 6 trees, I think. At our house, we had 100 ounces of syrup, okay? Which is not quite a gallon, to put it into perspective. So it's what your goals are. Is it just for you to have, for you to do as fun? Do you want enough syrup for yourself that you don't have to buy any from the grocery store throughout the year? Do you want to be able to put it in cute little bottles and give it to gifts to your friends and family? Because that's also a really cool thing to be able to do. So I think if you start with 5 trees or less, you will not be overwhelmed, but it wouldn't be enough for my family for the year. So, any other questions? Yes?
If you don't like such sweet syrup, like with the girls, I normally dilute it half and half. Could it be where I could just like try it and taste it and then just bottle it?
There's no reason not to. Yeah, you're not, there's no, like, at the point where you've already got it boiling, you're not.
So after you get it to the 219 or whatever plus 7, then you can.
Yeah, there's no reason you couldn't do that. It's just the opposite problem most people have. Most people like.
When you can afford to. Quit whenever you're done.
Yeah, quit whenever you're done. Because it's been boiling. It's been boiling as mostly water, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. So
it's safe to eat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. I would still filter it. But, any other questions? I think I forgot to mention. I don't know if I have it on there. Agrarian. Has anybody ever been in that store? Is in Indianapolis. It's in South Broad Ripple. They just moved to a new spot just down the road, and I have not been in their new location, so I cannot verify that they still have it, but they used to sell some supplies this time of year. But they're like all about homesteading stuff. They've got chicken stuff and beekeeping stuff and canning, so it's a great little store if you're ever out that way, regardless. Right.
I want to just give a plug for a couple of things coming up here at Mccloud. We have Maple Syrup Days, first 2 Saturdays in March. If you have our program guide that's on the back here, we will have different stations where you can rotate around and learn about how maple syrup was discovered. You can see some of that stuff in action. We set up an evaporator demonstration. We show tree ID if you need a refresher, that kind of thing. The festival is free. We recommend planning for about an hour to attend all the different activities. And then additional time if you want to come in and eat pancakes. Our Parks Foundation sets up a pancake breakfast inside the Nature Center here. So bring some money. Reservations are recommended so you can get a space. But that's all on the back of the Explorer and also inside and on our website and our Facebook page. So please come for that. And then if anybody is interested in helping tap trees or collect sap here at Mccloud, again, that is very weather dependent. We can put you on an on-call list if you'd like to put your information on here. We also take volunteers for maple syrup days too. So some of those activities are appropriate for families with kids. Some are just for adults. So let me know if you have any questions. We'd love your help.
And we have some twigs up here if anybody wants to test their winter tree IDs.
And it's also not raining right now, so if anybody wants to go outside, I can take some people outside to look at some trees right here in the yard. It is a little muddy, but it's not pouring down rain. So.
Yeah. And I should plug myself at 2 Acre Woods on Facebook and Instagram. Just if you want to follow the stuff that we're doing. I sell all of my syrup through Wonder Tree Farm, which is in Zionsville. It's on Michigan Road. Besides what I sell just to family and friends. You can buy my syrup there. We are all out for the season, but we'll have more soon. Fingers crossed. Thank you all for coming today.
Yeah, thank you.
Come on up and ask questions if you have any others. If you want to look at anything, I'm not in a hurry. So branching pattern. Okay, so you want, if you're looking for a maple tree, you want opposite branching, which is what this is. So you have symmetry here. When there's a branch on this side, there's a branch on this side. Now, sometimes you might have a spot where it looks like there wasn't, but if you look closely, it's just broken off, right? The opposite of that is alternate branching, which is what this looks like. So you don't have anything right across from it. You have to go up and over, up and over. And these aren't the greatest branching specimens, but you can see that on this too. And you can look at, these are called leaf scars. It's where the leaves were the previous year. They will follow that branching pattern. So the only ones that have the opposite branching are maple, ash, dogwood, and buckeye. And then from there, the best way to ID what you have is by the buds, which are at the very end of the branches here. And this is a sugar maple bud. They are small, kind of brown and scaly. Red maples will be a little bit bigger than this and generally red. And then silver maples will have these dark red kind of clusters of buds on the ends. And those are, and your key will take you through that. Once you get the branching, then you're gonna look at your buds. You can also go by tree shape a little bit. Tulip trees grow tall and straight. Sugar maples are big and